How are you?
I'm good.
You want to introduce the program?
Yes, very special program today by Jeannette de Beauvoir.
Provincetown Bookshop.
Sort of close. Sort of close.
Jeannette de Beauvoir.
De Beauvoir.
De Beauvoir.
Very nice.
Coming today, my name is Matt Clark. I'm the director here at the Provincetown Public Library. I just wanted to start by saying welcome to everybody, and we appreciate being here today to support a new book launch by Jeannette de Beauvoir. One side note of business I'd like to bring up, if you like Jeannette's books and would maybe like to learn a little bit more about her process, Jeannette will be leading a workshop here, co-sponsored by the Writer's Voice Cafe on April 29, writing a mystery or thriller. And pre-registration is now open for that event at the end of next month. So, last year we were lucky enough to have Jeannette come here and present Asylum, the first book in this series, to, again, a great audience, very enthusiastic audience. And Jeannette was pretty early in letting me know about the Deadly Jewels, but I have to say, her fan base beat her to the punch by about a month. People were emailing me, is Jeannette coming? Do you know Jeannette's having a new book come out? Why isn't Jeannette on the schedule? So when she finally emailed me and said, I have the book, I was like, thank God. All right. Let's get her in here and get this event going. So, here to launch and present the Deadly Jewels, let's give a round of applause for Jeannette.
Friends in the world, and I am so appreciative that you're here. Some of my super awesome friends have also brought food, and there's some great things to eat and drink there. So if you want even to just get up while I'm talking, if I get boring or something, feel free to do that. And also I want to point out again that Provincetown Bookshop is here, and surprisingly enough, they have my books for sale. So if anyone would like to purchase a book, don't come up while I'm talking, because then I'll have to talk even louder, but right afterward there will be some opportunities for us to chat some, and I'll be happy to sign them. Christmas is coming, gift time, so think about that. Also, while we're doing all this, I have a sign up here. This is for my mailing list. My mailing list only goes out once a month, so I won't, fill your inboxes. But I do try to make it interesting. I make it a little bit about some of the places I write about. I usually include a recipe. There's often a quiz with a prize. So do sign up. It's an email list. And as I said, you can unsubscribe at any time, and I only do it once a month. So please do. And finally, I am going to do a couple of raffles. Those of you who are on Facebook and who heeded my words, that if you say that you will come to the event and you actually come to the event, one of you will get a free book, so that will be here. So I want to find out just a little bit, because many of you I know, some of you I don't. Some of you have come from some distance to be here, which I also appreciate very much. But how many of you have read Asylum, the first in the series? Okay. How many of you liked it? I probably shouldn't ask that. It's a dark book. It is a dark book, but one of the things that was really fun in the book was introducing you to Martine LeDuc, who's my protagonist. And those of you who have read Asylum, what did you think of Martine? How would you introduce Martine? Say a word.
Really loved
use
her.
your language. Pardon?
Just loved her.
You loved her. Why did you love her?
Spunky. Smart,
Spunky.
sassy. Yeah.
Yes.
Hi.
Conflicts? Complex, I'm sorry.
I thought she was your alter ego. I could hear your voice in
Yeah. That's always dangerous. My first book that was ever published, at the time I was working nights on a mental health unit, which probably tells you a lot. And one of my coworkers, a nurse, said to me, I could see that was me. But it's funny how you can see things, and it's interesting that you see Martine in me. Diane.
Tenacious. I was going to say courageous, but she's just gutsy.
Yeah.
And she's very smart.
Yeah.
I like her thinking process. personally and professionally.
Thanks for saying that. I think it's really important to have someone who's smart. I know that there are some authors like the recently deceased Umberto Eco, where when you read him, you feel like if you don't know Latin, you're missing all the good jokes.
Right.
Right.
So I don't want to quite go that far, but I did want to give you someone who would be interesting, that could potentially go through a series. No pressure here, but there will be a third one if Deadly Jewels sells well. So no pressure at all. But Nan will be happy to help you if you'd like to contribute toward the effort of Martine continuing. So I don't want to give this away. I wanted this mostly to be, frankly, a party, because I'm excited my book is out. It's always a wonderful moment. About a month ago, I got a box. It was about the size of the box down there, with my copies, my author's copies of them. And it's just really exciting to hold something and say, I did this. I mean, there's so much in life that's, you know, where did the time go? And where did my effort go? And you know, am I making a difference in the world and all that? And to be able to actually hold something in your hand and say, I did this! It's very exciting. So I wanted to celebrate with you, and I'm really glad you're here, and I so appreciate it. Some of you have come from quite a distance, and I want to see, first of all, who came the farthest. So how many of you are from off Cape? Okay, all right. How far off Cape? Let's see. How many of you are from Massachusetts? How many of you are further away than Massachusetts? 3 of you. Wow. You are from?
Essex, Connecticut, 200 miles.
Not that she's counting.
Yeah.
She came actually to stay for the weekend so she could be here for this party this morning. It's wonderful. And I only know her from Facebook. Where you come from?
Maine.
Maine.
Where?
How many miles?
How many miles do we know?
I want to know where. 300 and
Ooh, she's got you beat.
Where in
else?
Maine?
You're from
Where in Maine?
near
LA?
near Rockland.
Yeah. So you didn't come here for this.
No.
Okay. Okay. So what that means is you get a copy of Deadly Jewels because you came the farthest. So I want to talk a little bit about Martine, because I think that she is an interesting person, and I want to, those of you who haven't read Asylum, I'm going to try to introduce it to you a little bit without boring people who have read it, and then talk just a little bit about Deadly Jewels, and then we can eat and drink and buy books. How's that sound?
Q&A?
We can have a Q&A, and you can interrupt me. I'm used to that. I used to teach. So what happened was I started writing mystery fiction almost as an accident. My interest has always been, there are some chairs back here if you'd like to come in. My interest has always been history. I love history. It's a very strange thing to love, but I do. And if you've got access to electronic readers, I so recommend that you go and buy A Short History of the World by Christopher Lascelles, I think. But anyway, look up A Short History of the World, because it really is. It takes you through the whole thing. He's entertaining, it's short, it is short, and it's great. And if you don't like history, I think you'll like this. I love history, and I wrote quite a few historical novels. And these historical novels tend to have a fairly narrow group of people who are interested in them, especially in the United States, where fewer people are interested in history than are interested in history from my native France. And I thought, okay, well, that's fine. You know, I can have a small but devoted following. That's okay. And then a friend of mine said, gee, I've got this great idea for a mystery novel, but I can't write. Do you want to try to do it together? And I said, sure, because my sense, I've always read mysteries. I mean, my mother had a pile next to her side of the bed of mysteries. And all the classics, like Dorothy Sayers and Agatha Christie, and just amazing authors. And I fell in love with mysteries, and I read them, but I always felt like I can't plot. You know, I'm good at characters, I'm decent at dialogue, but I can't plot. And so we together wrote a book, which unfortunately is no longer available because it was only an ebook and the publisher went out of business, but I'm sure that had nothing to do with the quality of my book. Sort of like being told you're the best navigator of the Titanic or something, you know. So we wrote this book together, and as we were writing it, I was finding that I was putting some input into the plotting. So I thought, well, maybe I can do this. subsequently wrote Murder Most Academic. I don't know if any of you have read that. That's under another name, which is an unfortunate name because I never thought to Google it. You'd think I would know what century we're in. And so the nom de plume, the pen name that I chose, is also used by someone writing really bad pornography. So,
That's up, you did that
now, if I wrote pornography, it would be good pornography. That's how you know it isn't me. So I wrote that, and that's a sort of modern mystery, and it's a sort of entertaining heroine. And if you like reading it, please do. But then the idea for Asylum came to me, and Asylum was essentially this story that took place in the 50s, the 1950s. And I thought, well, you know, I like this idea. I could write this as historical fiction. No, because that's going to bring the audience back down. So I came upon the idea of creating this person in the present day who would have the potential to be able to explore this one particular story, which was really the only one I was all that interested in writing at the time. So I wanted it to take place in Montreal, partly because I love Montreal. I think I'm half French and half American, and I always thought if I were a city, I would be Montreal. Because you go into a shop there and they say, hello, bonjour, and wait to see what language you answer in. So, I mean, it's a wonderful city, and so I wanted it to take place there, and also the history behind it took place around Montreal. So I was pretty much there. So I thought, how do you find someone who has access to a lot of different things in the city, has some flexible time so that she can explore some of these things, and is someone that could be interesting. So I came upon the idea of the PR director, because I felt like, well, PR, you could potentially, you know, be interested in a lot of things. And by that time, fortunately, St. Martin's, my wonderful literary agent who had sworn he was going to be here but didn't come. That's okay, it's all right. He had already sold the idea to St. Martin's, and they had already said, okay, we'll contract for at least 2 books. So all right, so now that makes you think ahead a little bit, because Asylum was my story, you know, that was it. I'm kind of done with it, and then sort of, okay, now I have to think of something else to do with her. But anyway, so PR director, and being a director meant that she had staff, so that if she has to disappear for a couple of days to investigate some sort of mystery, she's got someone who can cover for her. Most of us couldn't just walk out of our job and say, sorry, I got something else to do for you. So that's how I came upon that. The reason that Martine has stepchildren is because I had stepchildren. And when I first got married, and which I no longer am, but that's a different story. When I first got married, they were very young, and it was absolutely horrible. It is horrible. Being a step-parent is one of the hardest things in the world, because, you know, by definition, you're going into a situation where somebody doesn't want you, whether the mother has died or whether they're divorced. They're not happy about you being there, and they make it really clear. So I was going to write, because I'm a writer, and that's what I do, and that's how I process things. I said, I'm going to write the definitive nonfiction book on step parenting, because there was absolutely nothing out there that was very helpful to me. Believe me, I read everything there was. I was going to call it Wicked, you know? Yeah, I like that idea too. However, I was too busy actually step parenting to write about step parenting. But I thought, well, I've got this really great life experience. We actually are now friends, the children and I. They're in their 20s. And we get along very well, but this was not the case at the beginning, as Julie can probably tell you about. She's one of the people I said, I can't stand this anymore. So I gave Martine stepchildren, and one of, I mean, all sort of laughter aside, one of the great things about doing something like that is you're giving them the opportunity for growth, because if you're going to have a character who's going to go through more than one book, you want to have them evolve. You don't want them to be the same person at the end of the second book that they were at the beginning of the first book. So I thought, well, if I give her something really challenging, and of course if you go to my workshop or any writing workshop around, people will say one of the most important things to do is to provide conflict, because that's what keeps the thing moving forward. Well, I thought, have I got conflict for you? So I gave her the stepchildren, and they were sort of around during Asylum. Has anyone actually yet read Deadly Jewels here yet? A couple of you.
In the process.
In the process, and you have. So you'll see that the children become much more of an issue in Deadly Jewels, because again, I wanted her to be confronted with something in her personal life as well as in this whole mystery idea. I also want to just go back and make an observation about this whole thing that I do, which is sort of blending the history and the mystery. I actually have a friend who says, I hate books that do that. I'm only going to read the stuff that's in the present day. Very short book. You know, what I do, if you've read the books, is that I do alternate between the present day and something that has happened in the past. In Asylum, it's of course the story of these orphans who were put into asylums, were put into places where they didn't belong for a lot of really bad reasons. But in any case, I had that alternating, this child who was in the asylum with the present day. And in this one, I don't think I'm giving anything away by saying what I tried to do with this. So, you know, I've written my first book. That's the first one. Asylum was the one. It was the book. I'm done. And then they're saying, okay, what happens next? And so I, of course, had to go to Montreal. Oh, it was so stressful. But no, I went and said, what other mysteries are there? Because the reality is that I believe strongly that we all, whether we're talking about us as individuals or families or communities or countries, we've all got something to hide. We've all got something we're not entirely comfortable with. We've all got something that we would just assume people didn't know. And that's the kind of thing that's sort of interesting to bring out because, again, you're bringing in conflict, you're bringing in emotions, you're bringing in something that the reader can kind of grasp onto. But the other thing about history and mystery is that, I should have asked this before, how many of you are mystery readers? So not too many of you. Historical fiction?
Some.
More. Wow. This is a very different crowd. Usually it's reversed. Well, good, you like history, so I probably don't even have to tell you the next bit, but you know, I practiced it, so I will anyway. No, I didn't. But with a mystery, you are always, even if it's a mystery that takes place in the present day, you're dealing with something from the past because the beginning of a mystery is almost always the end of something else. And in murder mystery, it's usually someone's life. That's how you start out. You start out with history. You start out with something that's already happened, and then your sleuth or whomever it is gets to solve it. And so one of the things that you do as a mystery writer and that mystery readers follow is sort of doing this, it sounds fanciful, but almost archaeology of the soul. You're going back to find out what happened back here that put this person on this path that ultimately ended up with them dying. So if you're already looking at that kind of history, then I think it makes some sense to put that into a context. So that's what I've done with both of these. Deadly Jewels was fun to find out that, I put this in the book exactly the way it happened. I had been doing some research online, and one of the things that I was reading was that scholars were sort of in this difference of opinion about where the British crown jewels were during the Second World War. If you've studied the Second World War, you know that it was pretty clear to everybody that Britain was going to get invaded. In fact, it didn't happen, but everyone thought it would. So, if you think that any moment the Germans are going to invade, and you've got this stuff that's really, you know, actually the British crown jewels aren't all that old, and they're not all that valuable in terms of monetary value, but they were hugely valuable in terms of people's morale, in terms of their sense of themselves as British. So you can imagine what it would have looked like to have Hitler sitting around with the crown on. So some scholars I read said, okay, so what they did was they took them and when I say they, I'm talking about the then king and his two daughters, one of whom is now the Queen of England. Apparently they took the jewels out of their settings and wrapped them up. And some people say they went and put them in a cave in Wales. And some people say they went to Montreal. And the reason they went to Montreal is that Canada's Commonwealth, so it's still sort of on the right soil, but it's also safer. So I'm reading this and I'm reading, oh, well, some people still say it's in Wales. And so I'm thinking, okay, the scholarly world is divided about this. This is interesting. Maybe I'll posit that it happened. And so I was in Montreal and I was doing some research and I had a Saturday free. And so I thought, you know what, I'm just going to take the bus tour. I've never done that. In all the years I've been coming to Montreal, I've never taken the bus tour. I'm going to do it. So I sit on the bus and the tour guide comes on and he says, over my shoulder, you'll see the Sun Life building. The British Crown Jewels spent the war there. Okay, that was a big secret. So I had that happen to Martine. It's true, what Diane says, it's true that although I'm not ever consciously modeling any of my characters after myself, your own experiences do kind of creep in, and sometimes they're great ones to use as an illustration, which is what that did. I think that Martine is a lot braver than I am, to be honest. I don't think I have her courage, but it's nice to hear that I might. So that was the beginning of Deadly Jewels, and I did not title it. I want you to know that. But and I also, this was the first series that I used my real name for, and I was against it because who can pronounce my name, who can spell my name, who can remember my name, and my goal is actually to sell books, which means that I would like someone to be able to walk into a bookshop and say, I'd like, Asylum by Mary Jones or whatever it is. No one's going to go in and say, I would like a book by Jeannette de Beauvoir. So, but St. Martin's wanted me to use my real name because they said it gives you more credibility for a book about Montreal. So there it is. If you can't pronounce it, you're in good company. I think that when I'm reincarnated, I'm going to come back as Mary Smith. You should see what it's like to spell this on the phone to people. It's amazing. So anyway, that's the story behind it. That's the character behind it. And that's one of the reasons that I just think it's unfortunate that, and some people make a very good living at it, but it's unfortunate that we tend to have these books that get so closely defined about this is a mystery and this is history and they don't mix. Because that's not true life. We are complex people, we're complex beings, and there are so many different parts to each of us, our interests, our hobbies, our backgrounds, the things we read, the things we think about, our religions, all these things make us these really interesting people. And to say, well, I'm going to make a story about people, but I'm going to keep them fairly one-dimensional, I think is really a mistake. As I said, there's some people who make a good living out of it. I'm not going to cite any of their names, not that I'm jealous of them for making a good living out of it. But James Patterson, no, I didn't say that. You read James Patterson, so I shouldn't say that. I have James Patterson fans here going to never buy my books again, but anyway. So that's sort of the story of it. I am very much hoping that there will be a third outing for Martine. Asylum did not sell as well as the publisher had hoped and as I had hoped. And I do believe it's because it is very dark. Martine's a nice character to have presented, but I don't know if any of you know Neil Silverblatt. He's a local poet. And he's teaching a class next year on humor in poetry. And so he said to me, Jeannette, would you come and do a guest lecture for me? And I said, I don't do humor. I do dark. People die in my books, okay? My one book of poetry is full of poems about domestic violence, okay? This is not what you want in your humor class. So it is dark. But I think that there are some dark stories that should be told, and I'm just going to say one thing about that, and then I'm going to let you loose to ask me questions or eat this fabulous food or buy this fabulous book, which is that, again, we all have this history. Again, as individuals, as communities, whatever, we have this history. And I know that it's been said way too many times, and probably not entirely truthfully, that if you don't know your history, you will repeat it. I think that people do know their history and they still repeat it. But I also think that it's important to face some of the places where we've messed up, especially in the United States. And I don't know if any of the rest of you have. Well, I know Aldo's not American by birth, but those of us who grew up in Europe, I think that we've got a different perspective on history and what we should do about history. And we also have perhaps less optimism about being the good guys than Americans tend to have. Americans tend to believe that what this country does is right. And I really would like to challenge that, because we all make mistakes, and every country has made mistakes, and every community has made mistakes, and every individual has made mistakes, because we are human, that's what we do. And to deny that, I think, is problematic. It's problematic, I think, for the United States on the world stage, but it's also problematic if we don't say, I understand that I messed up. I mean, I'm Catholic, and one of the things that I treasure about my church is that we've got confession and reconciliation. You have the opportunity to say to another human being, I really messed up. And to have someone say to you, yeah, I am a witness to that. You know, even if it's a secret that nobody else knew, and I tell the priest, I've got this witness to, I messed up and I'm gonna try to do better. And I think we can only try to do better if we acknowledge where we've messed up. And I think that's one of the reasons that Asylum was important to me to tell, even if it is not a cheerful story. I do think I gave you a little hope at the end. Not many reviewers seem to have thought that. But it's saying, you know, this terrible thing did happen. And I think it's important for us to remember that. Not that we're ever going to repeat that particular terrible thing, but to just acknowledge here's a place where we messed up. And we messed up in a fairly dramatic way. You don't see that as much in Deadly Jewels. It's a lot more cheerful story, despite the people getting killed, of course. Not as cheerful for them. But it was fun to write, and I hope that you'll read it. I hope that you'll enjoy it. And that's all I have. If you'd like to ask me some questions, please do. I do want to say before we start that, yes, I am plugging. If you like my mysteries and would like to learn how to do it yourself, I am doing a workshop here on writing the mystery novel, writing the thriller. It's a 3-hour workshop. You'll end up with something at the end that perhaps you can go forward and get a contract where they'll change the title you want to put your book. So anyway, that will be here. I've got some things on that. I've got cards, a lot of cards that tell you about both books. Please take a whole bunch of them and give them out. Leave them on the subway. Tell people to buy this, whatever you'd like. Again, this is my sign up for my mailing list. I've also got some cards here if you ever want to ask me questions. I do answer emails, so pick up one of these, come and buy a book, and eat some of this great food. So, question, Diane.
Well, can I make a comment?
Comment, yes.
First of all, I like the French idioms in the books.
Thank you.
And I really enjoyed seeing the French, and then a lot of times you said it again in English.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I learned, and I love the sound of French, and I just heard it in my head. So please continue to do that. I don't know, you can decide yourself. I love the but I love having the French. That's
Well, I
what
do
made
think
it.
that's important. I think the context is important. That's what, again, makes a story, I think, come alive, is to show the place where it's happening, and to give you a flavor of the culture where it's happening. Interestingly, I have a friend in Israel who says that she thinks that it was a terrible mistake having a French name, because no one can say Martine LeDuc. And she thought it was terrible having French in there. So, you know, you pay your money and you take your pick, right?
Wow. And I love the going back and forth in time. That's the history. And let me just end. I may have other questions, but let me just end with, I did not see your book as a dark book. I saw it as a dark subject. I mean, kidnapping and putting, you know, whatever. I won't give it away. And this too.
Because we have that for sale too, if you want.
Yes,
The
but
dark
I
one.
did not see the book as a dark book.
Well, thank you.
I thought it was very balanced with the personal and the political and the. So I don't understand them.
I agree with you.
I mean, I have a theater background. Maybe that has something to do with it. But I really didn't see it as a dark book. So it had a dark subject, but there's a difference.
There is some hope at the end, I think. And that was
Hope.
important.
Just
to put in.
discovering and revealing things is hopeful.
But I've been amazed at, the publisher sends out the books for reviews from some of the major reviewers like Publishers Weekly and Kirkus and all that. And they were all kind of about Asylum, and all of them have been really great reviews for Deadly Jewels. So obviously this is cheerier and whatever. Anyone else have anything they want to ask Susan?
I think that maybe in the future Asylum will get people, it'll be like a retro book that'll.
Right,
Doesn't that happen sometimes?
Yeah, absolutely. And I intentionally made it so that you can pick up Deadly Jewels without having read Asylum and not miss anything. So that if you read Deadly Jewels and you really like Martine and you haven't read Asylum, you can still go back and do that. So, Julie.
What, you mentioned that Deadly Jewels was not your first choice as a title. What didn't you like about Deadly Jewels, and what did you want to call it?
Deadly Jewels sounds a lot like a romance to me, and if there's one genre I am really not interested in writing, it's romance. They were probably right. My first choice, the other thing is I really wanted the series to have a one-word title, especially to balance the Jeannette de Beauvoir, which is really, really a name. I did want to call it Bijou, which is the French word for jewels.
Yeah.
But they said, no, that's way too much French and that's too much complication. And I'm smiling at Julie because one of her cats is named Bijou.
Very flattered.
Yes, I would have named it after your cat. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Yes.
Jeannette, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you very
Second
much,
of all, I
Brady.
was really struck by just the glancing comment you made just now about the problems of being categorized in a genre.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, it seems to me that authors who become identified with so-called genre fiction, mystery, horror, science fiction, romance, tend to get no respect from the mainstream publishing industry. And I've noticed that many of the masters of these genres in recent decades have been women writers. So I was wondering if you would care to expound on that. Do you think there's a gender problem here?
I think there's always a gender problem. If you have 3 hours, I can tell you more about my opinions about that. But no, I think you're right. Genre fiction has often, and sometimes for good reason, been sort of a second cousin to literary fiction, which is what gets the major book prizes, and is where you have to look up words, and someone like me has a pretty good vocabulary. I've had to look up words sometimes. There is definitely that sense of, the poets and the literary novelists are here, and the mystery writers and the romance writers and the science fiction writers are somewhere else. And those are amusing and entertaining, but they're not real literature. Yes, absolutely. I'm not sure that that's tied to women per se. I think that's tied to at times the genres have been very poorly written. There's no question about that. But I would argue there are some mystery writers today who I would put up there for the Booker Prize or anything. If you read any, Elizabeth George is good. Phil Rickman.
Yeah.
Read Phil Rickman. He just is amazingly lyrical. I hope that mine are well written. I think they are. They're the best I could do, so it is what it is. But I also think that it's true that in terms of the serious literature, that men are definitely taken more seriously than women. And if you look at the prizes and you look at some of the, even in journalism, why aren't women who are now reporting from battlegrounds not getting the journalist prizes? There's definitely an issue there. But I think that in terms of the genre, it really is this sort of snobism about, this is what literature is, and you're just entertaining.
Right.
I'd like to think that you can entertain and still write well. I also don't think there's anything wrong with entertaining. I mean, I love it when someone says, I couldn't go to sleep last night, I was reading your book. To me, that's the best compliment in the world, because I gave you a few hours of entertainment, I gave you a few hours of escapism, I gave you a few hours of maybe, hopefully, getting you to think about something you hadn't thought about before. So obviously, as a genre fiction writer, I'm going to defend it.
Yeah.
But I also think that it's unfortunate that we have this bifurcation where there's part of life that's serious, and then there's part of life that's fun, and never the twain shall meet.
Right, and that's something that's always intrigued me, just in terms of the novel as a genre in and of itself, as an art form in and of itself. You know, since Richardson in the 18th century, it's always seemed to me that the novel as an art form has been connected with either female authors or stories about women, and yet this gender issue, which is so central to the history of the novel as an art form, somehow, you know, the novelists who are respected are writing about, you know, the Bildungsroman, you know, the male narrative of transcendence. So I was wondering, you know, how you thought about this or approached it in your fiction.
There's an interesting, I can't cite the sort where it is, but Margaret Atwood talks a lot about this in some of her essays. And she says, you know, men write novels about men, and women write novels about men kind of too. They're just looking at different body parts. But yeah, I think it's a real issue. And then even within the genres, there's also, you know, this sort of stepladder thing. I don't know, those of you who read mysteries, you probably know that there are the police procedurals, and there are cozy mysteries, and there are people who Siamese cats solve the crime. Okay, so you see, I've got a little bit of that inbred snobism too, because I don't particularly want to read a book where the cat solves the crime. I love cats, but no, this doesn't work for me. This is not intellectually challenging enough for me. So, you know, even within genres, and the same thing, you know, I know that and another genre where women are underrepresented is in science fiction writing, where that too, you can read these books that are just very, very superficial, and then, you know, if you look, you can find some women writers like Sherry S. Tepper, for example, whose novel Grass, I think, is one of the best novels I've read, period, and it's science fiction. I don't really read science fiction that much. But you're also looking at some people who are really trying to make the genre more literary, more intelligent, and I'm not sure it's so much to draw more people in as much as it's just because we're evolving and demanding more. Hopefully we are, you know. I'm not going to read mystery where the cat solves it, though, sorry. Anyone else? Yes.
I'm not a fiction fan, but are the British Crown Jewels in the book?
Yes.
Okay.
They absolutely are.
All right. And you didn't really tell me very much about what is the story.
Okay, I will tell you some of the story. I intend to with it. So, the history is, of course, that the British Crown Jewels did come to Montreal during the war. They were stored under the Sun Life Insurance Building. And my backstory, so again, I'm weaving into present time with the past. And the past is a person, a member of the German army, is in Montreal, has been sent there to find out about these, and gets murdered. And I'm not going to tell you who murdered him, I won't go that far. But in the present day, what's happened is Martine is approached by a student at McGill who has, she claims, proof positive that the jewels were indeed in this vault, but also that some of them are missing, and that what was returned to London after the war was not all the right jewels. That's the fiction part. I made that up completely. And I'm really clear, I hope I'm really clear. I always do an author's note that tells you, here's what's true, here's what I made up, so that you can at least extract the history from it and know that some of it, yeah, I did obviously make up for the sake of the story. So what happens is that as Martine is going into the underground, this was fun. Research is fun. I mean, I really think that some of us write books just so that we can travel and do really fun research. I got to go in the underground of under the city of Montreal, in the sewers and all these underground rivers. They were like crisscrossing all these rivers underground. So they go down there, and they do find this skeleton with the bullet hole in the cranium, so they know that there's been a murder, and they do find a couple of diamonds. what ends up happening is the researcher gets killed in modern day. I usually have somebody get killed in modern day to sort of get this going. And it's really unclear who's done it. We have a group of neo-Nazis who are fairly important in the book, and I don't want to say a whole lot about them because they're fairly important in the book and I'd like you to discover it. But there are people who are in Montreal now, as there are people, unfortunately, who are all over North America who are white supremacists, and they have an agenda in the book, and that's all I want to tell you about that part of it. In the meantime, of course, you've read it.
Not yet.
You didn't read it yet?
Part of it.
Terrible, terrible, terrible. One of the things I do professionally is I edit books, and I'm on a couple of editing lists on the net. So I have these friends who are really, really, really smart editors. And the book was released on March 8th. And on March 9th, I got an email from one of the editors on the list who said, I found a typo. Anyway, so there is, just as there is in Asylum, there is a scene toward the end that has you thinking that probably Martine is not going to live through this adventure. She does, because I want to have a third one. But that's sort of, I'm being purposely a little bit vague here, Jen, because I really don't want to give too much of it away. But
Well, I am a history fan.
I know.
So if there's any
There's some great history in it.
juicy history stuff
There
in
is
it,
juicy
I might be
history.
bagged.
There is juicy history, and at the end of it, after the epilogue, there is an author's note, and oh right, and so so the other thing historically that's in this, I'll talk fast because you're probably getting hungry. The other thing is that the jewels were probably sent across, and you might say, oh, how dangerous. Actually, there was this whole operation called Operation Fish, I didn't make that up, that had a lot of gold and a lot of securities coming from Britain into Canada and the United States, because they had to pay for all of the convoys that you've read about. I'm sure when you were studying the Second World War, all the convoys that supplied Britain, because it was cut off and isolated, they would never have been able to make it through without this. So they had gold and securities and probably the crown jewels going across one way, and then these convoys coming. And you got to know that, you know, it was horribly dangerous. There were German U-boats all over the place. The weather was terrible. It's the North Atlantic. And one of the things in the book, I do deviate from the truth in saying that the Germans were able to find out about it and did some things to try to sabotage it. But what I find absolutely amazing is that that's not true. No one knew. They managed to get all of this gold, all of these securities from London over to Halifax and down to the United States, and no one knew. And I just find, I get shivers up my spine when I talk about this. These people were incredibly brave. And if for no other reason than to honor what they've done, read the book. How's that we're happy to sell you some books. I'll be happy to sign some books for you. There's lots of food here. I've got really great friends who brought great food, so please help yourselves. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.